The sound of a slap echoed through Courtroom 6B like a gunshot. One moment, 32-year-old Keisha Williams stood before the bench, hands trembling as she tried to explain why she'd missed her court date. The next moment, she was on the floor, her cheek burning, her dignity shattered in front of 50 witnesses. What happened in those next 60 seconds would change everything. Not just for Keisha, not just for that courtroom, but for an entire system that had forgotten who it was supposed to serve. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand what happened that day, we need to go back. Back to where this story really begins. Keisha Williams grew up in the South Side projects of Detroit. Her mother worked 2 jobs. Her father left when she was 4. She raised her younger brother while her mom worked nights at the hospital and mornings at the diner. She wasn't perfect. Nobody is. At 17, she got caught shoplifting diapers and formula. Not for herself, for her neighbor's baby. The mother was 16, alone, desperate. Keisha made a choice. A stupid choice, maybe, but one that came from somewhere human. That conviction followed her everywhere. Job applications, apartment rentals. Even 10 years later, that one mistake was the first thing anyone saw when they looked at her record. By 32, Keisha was working at a call center. Minimum wage. No benefits. She had a 7-year-old daughter named Maya. Maya's father wasn't in the picture. It was just the 2 of them in a 1-bedroom apartment with walls so thin you could hear the neighbors breathe. 3 months before that day in court, Keisha got a ticket. Expired registration. She meant to pay it. She really did. But then Maya got sick. Really sick. Pneumonia. The hospital bill was $800. The registration ticket was $150. She chose her daughter. Anyone would. But the court doesn't care about your choices. The court sent a notice. Appear on November 14th or face additional penalties. Keisha put the notice on her fridge. She circled the date. She set 3 reminders on her phone. Then her mom had a stroke. November 14th came and went. Keisha spent that day in a different building, holding her mother's hand in the ICU, watching machines breathe for her. She missed her court date. The system didn't care. A warrant was issued. 2 weeks later, Keisha was pulled over for a broken taillight. The officer ran her license. The warrant popped up. She was arrested on the spot. Maya crying in the back seat as social services was called. That's how Keisha Williams ended up in Courtroom 6B on December 2nd, standing before Judge Harold Morrison. Judge Morrison had been on the bench for 23 years. He'd seen everything, or so he thought. He was known for running a tight courtroom. No nonsense. No excuses. He believed in order. In rules. In the law as it was written, not as it was felt. That morning, he'd already heard 30 cases. Traffic violations. Petty theft. Unpaid fines. Face after face. Excuse after excuse. He was tired. His back hurt. His coffee had gone cold 2 hours ago. When Keisha's name was called, she walked to the podium on shaking legs. She wore her best outfit. A black skirt she bought at Goodwill. A white blouse with a small stain on the collar she tried to hide with a scarf. She braided her hair the night before, fingers moving automatically while her mind raced with what she would say. "Ms. Williams," Judge Morrison said without looking up, "you failed to appear on November 14th. Do you have anything to say?" Keisha's mouth was dry. "Yes, Your Honor. I'm so sorry. My mother had a stroke that morning. I was at the hospital. I have the records. I brought them with me." She held up a manila folder. Her hands shook so badly the papers rattled. Judge Morrison finally looked up. His eyes were cold. "Ms. Williams, this court issued a clear directive. You had options. You could have called. You could have requested a continuance. You chose to ignore your legal obligation." "I didn't ignore it, Your Honor. My mom almost died. I couldn't just." "Enough!" His voice cut through the courtroom. "I've heard every excuse imaginable. Family emergencies. Car trouble. Alarm clocks that don't work. The law applies equally to everyone. If I make an exception for you, I have to make an exception for everyone." Keisha felt something crack inside her chest. "Please. I'm just asking for a chance to explain. You had your chance. On November 14th. He looked down at his papers. "I'm adding contempt of court to your charges. 60 days in county jail. Bailiff." "Wait!" Keisha's voice broke. Please, I have a daughter. She's 7. She has no one else. Please. That's when Officer Derek Stanton moved forward. Officer Stanton was 45. He'd been a bailiff for 12 years. He was 6'3", 240 pounds. He believed in order too. In respect. In people knowing their place. He didn't like when people raised their voices in court. He especially didn't like when they talked back to the judge. "Ma'am, step back," he said, his hand on Keisha's shoulder. Keisha pulled away. Not violently. Just instinctively. The way anyone would when a stranger grabs them. "Don't touch me. Please. I just need to." That's when it happened. Officer Stanton's hand came up fast. An open palm. The sound cracked through the courtroom like thunder. Keisha stumbled backward. Her hand went to her face. For a moment, there was total silence. 50 people frozen. Mouths open. Eyes wide. Then Keisha did something no one expected. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She looked Officer Stanton dead in the eye. Then she looked at Judge Morrison. And she started walking. Not toward the exit. Not toward the bailiff. She walked straight toward the bench. Toward the judge's chair. Toward the highest seat in the room. "Ma'am, stop right there." Officer Stanton lunged for her, but Keisha was already climbing the steps. Judge Morrison stood up, his face red. "What do you think you're doing?" Keisha reached the bench. She stood next to the judge's chair. Her cheek was swelling. A red handprint bloomed on her dark skin. But her voice was steady. "I'm sitting where you sit," she said. "Just for a second, so I can see what it looks like from up here." The courtroom erupted. People shouting. Officers moving. Judge Morrison yelling for order. But Keisha had already sat down. She placed her hands on the wooden armrests. She looked out at the courtroom. At the scared faces. The desperate faces. The faces of people just like her. For exactly 10 seconds, Keisha Williams sat in the judge's seat. Then the officers pulled her down. Roughly. Handcuffs clicked around her wrists. She didn't fight. She just kept looking at Judge Morrison. "Now you're going to jail," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "Contempt of court. Assault on a judicial officer. You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Keisha smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was sad. Knowing. "No, Your Honor," she said quietly. "The biggest mistake was thinking people like me don't matter." They dragged her out. The courtroom stayed silent. Judge Morrison called a 15-minute recess. His hands were shaking as he left the bench. What Judge Morrison didn't know was that someone had filmed the whole thing. Sarah Chen was in court that day for a speeding ticket. She was a law student at Wayne State University. She'd been recording the proceedings for a class project on courtroom procedures. She captured everything. The slap. The walk to the bench. Keisha's words. Sarah sat in her car in the parking lot, watching the video on her phone. Her hands were shaking. She knew what she had. She also knew what could happen if she released it. She thought about her future. Her career. The bar exam she'd taken 2 years. Then she thought about Keisha Williams. About the red mark on her face. About a 7-year-old girl whose mother was being taken to jail. Sarah posted the video to Twitter at 2:47 p.m. By 4 p.m., it had 10,000 views. By 6 p.m., 100,000. By midnight, 3 million people had watched a bailiff slap a black woman in court, had watched her walk to the judge's seat, had heard her speak those final words. The internet exploded. People were outraged. Horrified. The hashtag Justice for Keisha started trending. Civil rights organizations got involved. The NAACP. The ACLU. Local news stations camped outside the courthouse. But it wasn't just activists paying attention. Regular people were watching. Sharing. Commenting. People who'd never thought much about the justice system suddenly saw it clearly. They saw a woman who'd missed court because her mother almost died. They saw a system that didn't care. They saw a man in uniform hit her for trying to explain. And they saw what happened when someone challenged the system, even for 10 seconds. The Wayne County Prosecutor's Office issued a statement. They were investigating. Officer Stanton was placed on administrative leave. Judge Morrison declined to comment. But Keisha was still in jail. That's when attorney Michelle Torres saw the video. Michelle was a defense attorney. She'd been practicing for 15 years. She'd seen plenty of injustice, had fought plenty of cases, But something about Keisha's face, about that moment of dignity in the judge's seat, hit different. Michelle drove to the county jail that night. She met with Keisha in a small room with concrete walls and fluorescent lights. Keisha looked exhausted. The swelling on her face had gone down, but the bruise had deepened. Purple and yellow. A mark that would last. "I'm not here to judge you," Michelle said. "I'm here to help. If you want it." Keisha looked at her. Really looked. "Why?" "Because what happened to you was wrong. And because you deserve someone in your corner." Keisha's eyes filled with tears. For the first time since the slap, she let herself cry. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just quiet tears rolling down her face. "I just wanted him to see me," she whispered. "Just for a second. I wanted him to see me as a person." Michelle reached across the table. She took Keisha's hand. "I know. And now millions of people see you. The question is, what do you want to do about it?" The legal battle that followed was brutal. The prosecution charged Keisha with contempt of court, disrupting judicial proceedings, and assaulting a judicial officer. They wanted to make an example of her, to show that you don't challenge authority. You don't sit in the judge's seat. Michelle fought back. She filed motions. She called expert witnesses. She built a case not just about Keisha, but about the system that had failed her. She brought in Keisha's medical records from her mother's stroke, time-stamped evidence that showed exactly when Keisha had been at the hospital on November 14th. She brought in Maya's school counselor, who testified about how the little girl had been affected by her mother's arrest. She also filed a complaint against Officer Stanton. Excessive force, assault, violation of civil rights. The case became national news. Cable networks covered it. Think pieces were written. People took sides. Some said Keisha was a hero, a symbol of resistance against a broken system. Others said she was a criminal, that you can't just ignore court dates and expect no consequences, that she'd assaulted an officer by sitting in his judge's seat. The debate raged for weeks. Behind the scenes, pressure was mounting. The Judicial Board was investigating Judge Morrison. The police department was investigating Officer Stanton. The whole system was under a microscope. Finally, 4 weeks after that day in court, a hearing was held. The courtroom was packed. Media, activists, supporters, people who'd driven from across the state just to be there. Keisha sat at the defense table in a borrowed suit. Michelle sat beside her. On the other side, 3 prosecutors in matching navy blue. A different judge presided. Judge Elizabeth Hawkins. She was 62. She'd been on the bench for 30 years. She was known for being fair, for being thoughtful, for actually listening. The prosecution went first. They played their version of events. Keisha had ignored a legal obligation, had shown disrespect to the court, had committed a crime by sitting in the judge's seat. "This isn't about sympathy," the lead prosecutor said. "This is about the rule of law. If we allow people to simply take over a courtroom whenever they disagree with a ruling, we have chaos." Then it was Michelle's turn. She stood up slowly. She didn't have a flashy opening. She didn't raise her voice. She just told the truth. "Your Honor, my client is guilty of one thing: being human. She's guilty of loving her mother enough to be at her bedside during a medical emergency. She's guilty of trying to explain that to a judge who wouldn't listen. And she's guilty of sitting in a chair for 10 seconds to remind everyone in that courtroom that she was a person, not a case number." Michelle played the video. The whole courtroom watched. Even though most had seen it before, watching it in that room, in front of a judge, felt different. They saw Keisha try to explain. Saw Judge Morrison cut her off. Saw her plead about her daughter. Saw Officer Stanton's hand come up fast and hard. Then they saw Keisha walk to that bench. Saw her sit. Saw her look out at the courtroom with tears in her eyes and dignity in her spine. When the video ended, the courtroom was silent. Judge Hawkins sat back. She looked at Keisha for a long moment. "Ms. Williams, please stand." Keisha stood. Her legs were shaking. Michelle stood beside her. "I've reviewed everything in this case," Judge Hawkins said. "The medical records, the testimony, the video, and I've thought a lot about what justice means." She paused. The courtroom held its breath. "You did miss your court date. That's a fact. But the circumstances matter. You were dealing with a family medical emergency. You had documentation. You tried to explain. And instead of being heard, you were silenced. And then you were assaulted. The prosecutors shifted in their seats. What you did next was unconventional. Some would say it was wrong. But I understand why you did it. You wanted to be seen. You wanted to matter. And the truth is, in that moment, the system had failed you. Judge Hawkins looked down at her papers, then back at Keisha. I'm dismissing all charges against you. You're free to go. The courtroom erupted. People crying, cheering. Keisha collapsed into Michelle's arms, sobbing. But Judge Hawkins wasn't done. She banged her gavel. However, she continued, this case has exposed serious problems. Officer Stanton's use of force was inappropriate and excessive. I'm recommending he be terminated and face criminal charges for assault. More gasps. Officer Stanton, sitting in the back, stood and stormed out. And Judge Morrison, Judge Hawkins said, her voice hard, showed a disturbing lack of compassion and judicial temperament. I'm recommending a formal review of his conduct. She looked back at Keisha. Ms. Williams, you didn't deserve what happened to you. No one does. I hope you can heal from this. And I hope we all learn something. She banged the gavel one last time. This court is adjourned. Outside the courthouse, media swarmed. Cameras flashing. Microphones thrust forward. Michelle handled most of the questions, but eventually, someone asked Keisha directly, what do you want people to know? Keisha looked at the camera, at the hundreds of faces, at the people watching from home. I want people to know that the system isn't broken for everyone, she said. It works fine if you have money, if you have connections, if you look a certain way. But for people like me, it's broken every single day. She took a breath. I didn't plan what I did. I just wanted to be heard. I wanted someone to see me as a person, not a problem. And for 10 seconds, sitting in that chair, I felt like I mattered. Her voice broke. Everyone deserves that. Everyone deserves to be seen. The clip went viral within hours. Those words, that moment, became a rallying cry. In the weeks that followed, things started to change. Officer Stanton was fired. Criminal charges were filed. He eventually pleaded guilty to assault and served 6 months in county jail. The same jail where Keisha had been held. Judge Morrison retired early. He issued a statement saying he was stepping down to spend time with family, but everyone knew the truth. The judicial review had found multiple instances of similar behavior. Keisha wasn't the first person he treated that way. She was just the first one people saw. The courthouse implemented new policies, mandatory training on trauma-informed practices, a system for emergency continuances, better communication with defendants about their rights. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't enough. But it was something. Keisha's mom recovered from her stroke. She moved in with Keisha and Maya. The 3 of them shared that 1-bedroom apartment, but it felt full in a good way. Full of love, full of survival, full of hope. Keisha got a new job, a nonprofit that helped people navigate the legal system. She answered phones, helped people fill out forms, told them their rights. She understood what they were going through because she'd been there. Maya was proud of her mom. She didn't fully understand everything that had happened, but she knew her mom was brave. She knew her mom had stood up when it mattered. 6 months later, Keisha was invited to speak at a conference about criminal justice reform. She stood at the podium, looking out at hundreds of faces. Lawyers, activists, judges, police officers, people from all over the country who wanted to fix a broken system. She told her story, the whole thing, from the expired registration to the slap to those 10 seconds in the judge's seat. When she finished, the room was silent. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Then everyone. But Keisha held up her hand. Please. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who got lucky. Lucky that someone filmed what happened. Lucky that people cared. Lucky that I got a lawyer who believed in me. But there are thousands of people going through the same thing right now. People with no cameras. No lawyers. No one who cares. Those are the people we need to think about. She looked around the room. The system doesn't need heroes. It needs to change. It needs judges who listen. Police who protect. Lawyers who fight. And it needs all of us to remember that the people in those courtrooms, in those jail cells, are human beings. They're mothers and fathers and daughters and sons. They matter. We all matter. The applause was deafening. Today, Keisha Williams is 34. She still lives in Detroit with her mom and daughter. She still works at the nonprofit. She still drives a car with a cracked windshield and a bumper held on with duct tape. But she also speaks at conferences. She consults with organizations working on reform. She tells her story again and again because she knows it matters. That video of her sitting in the judge's seat has been watched over 50 million times. It's been shown in law schools, used in police training, discussed in courtrooms across the country. Some people still think she was wrong, that she broke the law, that she deserved punishment, but more people see her as what she is. A woman who was pushed to her breaking point and found the courage to stand up, to sit down, to demand to be seen. The slap that echoed through Courtroom 6B that day was heard around the world. And the 10 seconds Keisha Williams spent in the judge's seat changed more than her life. It changed how millions of people think about justice. Because justice isn't supposed to be about power. It's not supposed to be about putting people in their place. Justice is supposed to be about seeing people, hearing people, treating people with dignity. That's what Keisha was asking for that day. Not special treatment. Not to be let off. Just to be heard. To be seen. To matter. And for 10 seconds, in that judge's seat, looking out at that courtroom, she proved something important. She proved that everyone, no matter who they are or where they come from, deserves a seat at the table. Deserves to be heard. Deserves justice. Not the justice of rules and procedures and power, but the justice of humanity, of compassion, of seeing each other as people. That's the justice Keisha Williams fought for. And that's the justice we all deserve. The story doesn't end here. It continues every day in courtrooms across the country, in the faces of people trying to be heard, in the moments when the system works and when it fails. But it also continues in the changes being made, the policies being written, the minds being opened, because one woman's courage in one moment can change everything. That's what Keisha Williams learned the day she sat in the judge's seat. And that's what we should all remember. Justice isn't a building. It's not a robe or a gavel or a badge. Justice is seeing each other, hearing each other, remembering that we're all human. And sometimes it takes sitting in someone else's seat to understand that.